Oh, heard you're watching now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, let's get started. Basic formation flying. So, goals for this is that you guys all become familiar with the different formations, the roles within the formations, how we maneuver within those formations, and how we do combat within those formations, along with a little bit of stuff on just overall flight planning. So, we'll start with formations, their names and descriptions. Most of these you guys should already know. They're fairly simple. We're mainly a German reenactment group, so we do base all our stuff off how the Germans did it. So Rata is just two aircraft flying together. Um, Technically, the wingman's supposed to be slightly higher than the leader, and either to the right or left doesn't matter. It's all about leader's preference. Then we have the Keta, which is the three-man formation, which has a leader and then two wingmen, each of the wingmen being on the right and left, slightly higher, same as the Rata. And the swarm, which is going to be what we mainly fly in. And a swarm is basically two individual elements of either ketas or ratas or a mix between the two. You have two ratas in this image here, and they consist of a leader of this a group, the flight lead, his wingman, then a section lead and his wingman. Then we have different spacings. We have three different spacings that we do between all these formations. The first one is going to be welded, and this one is a very close formation, basically parade formation. We don't use it that much other than maybe takeoff and landing, or maybe we're flying through a cloud and you don't want to lose flight lead. But other than that, we don't normally use it. It makes it really hard to check six for your wingman, and it's a lot more effort just staying in that formation than it's worth. Then we have loose echelons, which have a spacing of 100 to 250 meters. This is what you'll normally fly within your element. And hers, this is what you've been flying with me a lot, is a loose echelon and pictured here. And I'll give you all a link to this PowerPoint so you can go through it if you want. Most of the information, like I said, though, is also in the SCG user manual. And if you have any questions, just pitch in. We'll normally use this and climb out in transit to a target. We won't really use this when we're expecting enemy contacts. We'll go into the next thing, which is going to be a combat spread, which is just a looser echelon with a technically the spacing's pretty varied, 100 meters to a kilometer. It's going to be whatever the person that's spotting the six of the other guy is confident with his ability to maintain eyes on his wingman. The farther away, the better, because it gives you more room to check six and also more room to maneuver into each other should someone gain a six. Generally, the closer two people are, the easier it is for a single enemy to engage both at once. So spacing is always good. And then element spread is just the same as combat spread, but between two ratas or ketas, between two elements instead of two individuals. Any questions on the different formations and their spreads?
Are we going to go over numbering?
Yeah, I'll go over that next.
Awesome.
So roles within formations. So for welded formations, um, the only the leader has anything to do outside of just keeping formation. Since we don't really expect to encounter enemies when we're in welded formations, there's no reason for wingmen to be checking six or anything. Their goal is just to stay in a nice, close, pretty formation for the cameras, and then the leader does all the spotting and navigation necessary. Then for the rest of these, we will assume at least a loose echelon, or if not, a combat spread for them. So in errata, we label all for we label all the members in one of our formations by numbers just to make organization easier. So a leader will always be one, leader's wingman will be two, and then if there's another flight, that element's leader will be three, and his wingman will be four. So in this case for Rata, we only have two members. So flight lead is one, his wingman is two. Flight lead is responsible for monitoring the airspace around two, and two is responsible for monitoring the airspace around one. Two people is a really weak formation generally because there's not a lot of extra eyes able to watch places other than each other six. And honestly, a lot of the times, a two-man formation instead of doing something like this where you have a rata, it'll be a combat spread where each member of the formation is the same distance forward, so they're straight across from each other, looking six. So you don't have your flight lead having to look behind him more than number two does. Keta is similar to the rata, but two watches the six of one and three, and three watches the six of one and two, with the flight lead one being responsible for navigation and spotting targets and threats. Three is generally the minimum you want for a half decent formation because it leaves at least one pair of eyes able to look for threats while still having everyone's sixes covered. Finger four, this is also our swarm formation. So group of four, it's going to be so two Ratas in this case. You have number one flight lead, same as in a Keta, responsible for threats and targets and navigation. Then two checks the six of three and four, while three and four check the six of one and two. And element spread is just a finger four formation in a combat spread, essentially. And in this diagram, it does show one, in this case, two stays in formation with one, while one watches three and four, six. Four just stays in formation with three, while three watches one and two, six. This isn't always how I like to do this. I generally like it if two watches one, three, and four, six, and four watches three, one, and two, six, while one and three are responsible for keeping contact with each other so that the formation doesn't get lost, but also one and three each scan for targets further out. So one scans for targets on the right side of three, and three scans for targets on the left side of one, essentially, if that makes sense. And turns. We have three main types of turns that we practice while in formations. These. So first off, we have the tack turn. This is the turn that we'll do most of the time. It's generally a roughly 90-degree turn. It looks pretty complicated. It's really not. The leader will call something like tack left to heading 270. So say you're heading north, tack left 270 is going to be a 90-degree left-hand turn, which is what's pictured here. So you always start the turn with the person on the outside turning first. So in a left-hand turn, the person on the farthest right turns first, and a left-hand and a right-hand turn, the person on the farthest left turns first. And as soon as that person crosses the six of the next person in the formation, the next person will start their turn. So when one crosses six of two, two starts their turn. When crosses six of three, three starts their turn. And when three crosses six of four, four starts their turn. And the goal of this formation is that you quickly transition to a 90-degree turn while keeping formation and having minimum downtime between people being able to check six and keeping SA up. If you don't do a turn like this, you have to do a really long, drawn out turn to keep the formation together, and it just makes reacting to threats a lot harder. Next is a check turn. This is like the simplest turn we have. It's simply everyone stays in formation throughout an entire turn. It's generally pretty slow, and we only use it for minor course corrections, less than 45 degrees. And it's just follow the leader. The leader's going to start turning, and everyone just stays on him through the turn. People on the inside of the turn are going to have to cut power a little bit because they have less distance to travel. People on the outside of the turn have to increase their power a little bit to stay in formation. And then lastly, we have the opposing turn. which is a 180 return with each element of a flight turning into each other and crossing each other in the center of it, and it'll complete a 180 return pretty quickly. A word of note on the opposing turn and the tack turn: on these turns, after the turn's completed, everyone's roles will be inverted. So if you were on the left side of the formation, you'll now be on the right side of the formation. If you were on the right side of the formation, you'll now be on the left side of the formation. Any questions on the turns?
But with that opposing turn, do you have a standard on one person goes high or low or as far as the separation?
No. Generally, opposing turns we will only do over in combat spread because that's about the only time you'll have enough spacing to be able to do an entire opposing turn.
Yeah,
If we're not in combat spread and I want to do a 180, like we're in a closer formation or something, I'll just call two tack turns back to back. And technically, there's a term for that I
yeah,
could call instead, but it just gets too confusing because somebody won't notice when the turn's done, so they won't start the next turn to complete the 180. So it's just easier if the flight lead calls one and then calls again.
yeah.
But
And then, oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead, Hatchet.
On the tack turn, who goes first? It's the outside, the last element again,
Yeah,
or the
outside. So left hand turn furthest on the right goes first. Right hand turn furthest on the left goes first.
awesome. Thank you.
So in this diagram, one, two, three, and four are not the flight positions; they're the order that the turn goes in. So one turns first, then two turns, then three turns, then four turns. Even though in terms of like a flight makeup, red is one, four is two, orange is three, and blue is four. But the
All
numbers
right.
here represent order of turn, not flight makeup.
Excellent. Yeah, the numbers were giving me a little confusion.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for the opposing term, we like playing a game of chicken, see how close you can get to the guy before he breaks off. Maybe don't do that if you're playing too seriously, though.
Do,
Okay,
do you
so
ever just do a do you ever just do a like a reversal left where both people come left kind of thing, or both come right?
um, no, we won't generally do that because it makes it a lot harder to keep formation because there's going to be at some point in that where you'll lose eyes on whoever you're turning with.
Yeah. Okay.
And at that point, we would just do, like I said, we just do two tack turns left.
Yeah.
Or, like, for instance, if it's just a two-man formation and it's really easy to keep formation with just two people, I would just do two check turns left. The tack turns are generally reserved for larger formations where keeping formation throughout a turn is a challenge. I'm going to skip this section for now. I'll come back to it later, but this just goes over a series of simpler group tactics for engaging single enemies or when you're engaged by a single enemy. And we'll go over to formations in combat. So generally, there's two types of engagements that we go over when in combat. We have offensive engagements and defensive engagements. Offensive engagements are the preferred type. Obviously, it's when we've chosen to engage usually a smaller enemy force that we have an energy advantage over, while defensive engagements are the opposite. We do not want to engage in whatever combat we're in, and we're being forced to either because the enemy has a higher energy state and we can't get away, or for instance, they're bouncing our bombers and we need to protect those. So, defensive combats we don't like. They're a lot more difficult to handle than offensive combats because you don't have time on your side. You're fighting against the clock generally instead of being able to just run it out if you want, with like you can with an offensive engagement. And you don't have nearly as many options as you do with an offensive engagement. So, ideal offensive engagement is going to be a group of four of us, preferably. Someone spots a lone enemy with low SA, hopefully at a lower energy state. At that point, flight lead's going to delegate to either his section or the his wingman section, so either 1 and 2 or 3 and 4 to take the opponent to engage the opponent, and from there it's on if flight lead, for instance, if I was flight lead, I would usually delegate the opposite element of me. So I'd say, let's say Cool Whip was leading this other section. I'd say, Cool Whip, you take the engagement, and from there my element would stay high and cover Cool Whip's element as he decides the best way to tackle the enemy. Usually that's just going to be a simple, boom and zoom attack onto the opponent with his wingman trailing him by a kilometer or so to mop up if he misses. Should for something unexpected happen, another enemy pops up in the area, or Cool Whip and his wingman get in trouble with the enemy that they've handled, my element's free to hop in and help them disengage and take down the enemy should they need that help. Ideally, you never have more than one person on a given enemy at a single time, but up to two is all right. But you should never ever have more than two people on a single enemy. Defensive engagements are a lot different. They're very chaotic, and success is a lot more determined on your opponents making mistakes than you executing all your maneuvers perfectly. And success usually depends on communication and leadership ability for the flight leads. There's a wide variety of defensive engagements since in a defensive engagement you don't determine how the combat's going to go. It could be that whoever's engaging you plays it really safe and they just do boom and zoom and leave you plenty of time to form up and do your defensive breaks, or it could turn into a large furball very quickly if you're engaged by a numerically superior force that just wants to kill you quickly. So then the most important thing I'm going to cover today is going to be communication. This is the only slide I have on it. It's different for everyone you fly with. I've outlined here just some of the more common terms that I personally use and that you might hear a lot personally with hot and cold and some other reading like Shaw or In Pursuit or any of the YouTube videos out there use hot and cold a lot. In, out, and pulling are more SCG and me personally terms. So you probably won't find those outside of our flights, but clear and concise communication will really improve combat effectiveness for formation. Cluttered comms make it difficult to react quickly to new threats in the environment and changes in threats in the environment. And it's definitely something you should focus on if you're new to formation flying is keeping your comms clear and concise. And there's a lot of other terms out here that I haven't listed here that you've probably heard before. As long as whoever you're flying with knows the general idea of what you're saying is, it's fine to use whatever terms you know. There's no set vocabulary we have. We're not a real military organization. We don't have pages and pages of difference between a bandit and a enemy or anything like that.
Right.
And of course, at the bottom, we're here to have fun, so it's not all seriousness. Just remember to cut the chatter if stuff gets heavy. And just a quick example of a semi-ideal engagement. Um, you've probably heard me say similar stuff to this quite a lot. And then flight planning. So for fighter sortie, fighter sorties are fairly open-ended. First of all, they're not like ground attack sorties or escort sorties where you have a set objective that's really easy to define, such as, kill this objective, drop your bombs and RTB and stuff like that. Fighter sorties without a set goal end in one of three ways. Either you run out of fuel, you run out of ammo, or you get shot down. And none of those are ideal. If you run out of fuel, well, you can't fly back to base. If you run out of ammo, you can't defend yourself, so you get jumped flying back to base. And if you get shot down, well, you've gotten shot down. You failed in your mission as a fighter of shooting other people down without getting shot down yourself. So to avoid that, we always try to set objectives for our missions. These can be simple things such as just fly the designated flight plan, or just make sure everyone survives the mission. Don't do anything too risky. But they can also be more advanced things such as defending a certain objective, which we'll do quite a few times in tall. And those are a bit more open to discussion on what's worth a risk. Is it worth diving in on that flight of 8 IL-2s with escort to save the objective? Or even if we do that, are we just all going to get shut down and they're going to wipe the objective anyways? And then flight planning. This is the next stage after you set the objective for a flight. And this is where you go into not quite the nitty gritty, but you just set a bit more of the writing in stone for, how you're going to fly, what you're going to fly in, and where you're going to go with this flight. The bare minimum, a flight plan should include a target, an aircraft selection, some regroup points should something go wrong, because you will always want to assume that something might go wrong at some point, even if nothing does. And then directions for anything should people get separated for RTB and stuff. These don't really need to be illustrated well. Just verbally going through everything is perfectly fine in most situations. But here's just a very simple diet, actual flight plan with the IL-2 flight planner that I made up. We normally won't do something like this unless we're maybe on tall and or doing a very large formation with like 20 people or something. This is just simple. Takeoff from Dusseldorf. We're going to goal of this mission is to fly the designated flight plan. The red box represents where enemy contact is expected and where we'll patrol for a few minutes. The blue by the German supply depot represents a drop 2 point should something go wrong. Everyone should fly to Venlo and regroup there. And yeah, pretty simple stuff. I'm sure you've all seen something like this before.
Yeah.
And closing. So the majority of the stuff I've covered, pretty easy to employ, but it's also early on, it isn't as effective most of the time as just flying individually to your own strengths, especially if you've been flying individually for a long time. Your kills per sortie might go down. You won't be as effective as you normally were. But if you stick with it, you'll notice your survival rate will go up immensely. And after enough practice with it, the fundamentals of formation flying will really help improve your overall efficiency later on. And early on, our formations will probably be fairly strict just because you're all new to this, or most of you are at least. But as you get more and more used to formations, they can become looser and looser and allow the flexibility that individual flying has. And when you get really into it, it's a formation with a bunch of players that you fly with a lot and are used to flying with. Essentially stops becoming a formation again and feels more like flying on your own, just with 10 more of yourself there.
Yeah, I'm used to flying in formation. It's just, when I do sorties by myself, I almost get shot down, and even when I do fly in formation, I generally also end up getting shot down.
Yeah. The
For some reason, I just seem to be cannon fodder for some reason.
yeah, we haven't really been flying formation in our for fighter cover for our bomber nights, mainly because like I said, formations at the start especially are very strict and lack a lot of flexibility that's needed in an escort role, especially when our escorts are so few in number. Like preferably you have at least an equal number of escorts to bombers, if not more escorts. So when you have such little numbers, flexibility is required, and that's not something that a formation really gives.
Right.
But yeah, any questions about that stuff before I move into basic ACM, which I skipped over?
None in particular on my end.
All right. Well, I'm just gonna skim over our basic ACM. I don't expect you to memorize all of this stuff. After going through it just once, or be able to perform it perfectly in practice just by looking at a diagram or something. But you should have a general idea of the types of ACMs that a group allows you to perform that you can't normally perform alone. So we'll start with a simple cross split. Most of these, by the way, are also going to be defensive ACMs, things to do where an opponent is on your six and you want to safely remove him from your six and get on his six. So the cross split here is a defensive ACM where an enemy is fairly distant behind you, at least 3 kilometers. And it's going to be essentially each person doing a 180-degree turn. And this turn is going to force the opponent to focus on a single one in the formation. He's going to have to choose one of the two fighters in the formation to go after. And once he's chosen a fighter in the formation, that leaves the free fighter free to go offensive and slot in on the opponent's six. The big thing here is just recognizing that once that if you do this turn, the opponent has to choose a single fighter and it's going to leave the other fighter free to go offensive. Anything after the 180-degree turn and this person choosing to go after the right guy, you don't have to memorize this. You don't really need to bother with this funky rolling maneuver to dodge this shot or anything like that. Opposing splits, it's exactly the same thing as the opposing turn. It's just a hell of a lot faster and a hell of a lot harder. And the goal of this one is just to, instead of facing your six towards the enemy, your nose on with the enemy. You're not defensive, you're offensive on them. Bracket splits, these are a bit more difficult, and we really don't do these often because in most practical applications, they're still pretty risky and there's usually a safer play to make. But essentially, these are the same thing as a cross split, except instead of doing a 180-degree turn, you do a much shallower turn because you're already facing head on with the opponent. So either someone goes left, someone goes right. He has to choose one. Whoever he chooses, the other person's free to go offensive. Or we have high and low in the vertical as well. We usually prefer high and low ones, especially the low one, because this allows the low fighter to sneak up underneath the opponent's nose where he has no visual, so he can't really see if he's getting attacked or not. And then we have sandwiches.
Just as a note, these maneuvers, that's where you would call out hot or cold. So
Yeah,
when the opponent would have to choose, and then the person who got picked by opponent then call
yeah,
come hot, indicating that the other person is free to maneuver for a kill, while that the hot person is concentrating on evasion.
yeah. So hot and cold are for being engaged by an enemy, not if you're engaging. So if if you go in on someone and you see someone on your six, or you see someone on your wingman six, I'm hot, you're hot. You see that person, you see the enemy break off. I'm cold, you're cold, stuff like that. Or over in a larger formation, you know, one's cold, two's cold, three's hot, four you're not hot. We if you know names, you can call names, but generally the numbers are easier most of the time. No, who joined? No one, I guess. All right, so sandwich splits. This is probably the most common thing we'll use is sandwich splits, also known as dragon bags, which you've probably heard before. These mainly depend on Flies keeps joining and exiting for some reason. So the goal of this one is just to drag the opponent out, force him to follow a single member of the formation, and drag him between the other two members. So it's basically transferring the lateral separation in this case into a horizontal separation. If that makes sense. So in this case, it's a high closure one, which requires a steeper turn to force the opponent to lose more energy in his turn. So essentially, in this case, the guy on the right, which we'll call one. So one in this case has to do a very hard break turn to the right to force the bandit into doing a really high bleeding energy turn to the right, while his wingman two does a slower turn to slot in behind him. Formed correctly, there's really no danger for whoever's leading this. And in this case, number one would be, in my definition, he would be pooling, which I define down here, which is setting up a shot opportunity for someone else, which you'll hear a lot, especially in our offensive engagements. After a lead misses a shot or something, oftentimes people don't expect the second person to be coming in, so they'll nose up and go for, the gamble shot, doing a suicide climb straight into the air, making a really easy shot for the next person to fly in.
Yeah, sometimes I call that dragging. So
Yeah, dragging, pulling, both work. So then we have the low closure sandwich split. It's the same general concept, except it's just a lighter turn because there's the bandit's not approaching as quickly, so you don't need to be as defensive as you normally would be in the high closure turn. And then we have the half splits. This is what you would do if, for instance, in a sandwich. The half split is what happens in a sandwich if the person he doesn't go for the person that's turning. So in a high closure sandwich, let's say when this person turns, our bandit keeps going on the guy that has not turned yet. Then we would move into a half split maneuver where this guy that turned is going to turn back in, and we're basically going to have a sandwich set up here where we have our lead guy pulling the bandit, slotting in between them, and then our attempted sandwich puller coming back in or behind the bandit. And lastly, we have the trailing attack. This is the most basic one that we have. And this is the most common one that we use as well. Essentially, when setting up a boom and zoom attack on an opponent, we send in elements. We don't send in individuals unless we're way outnumbered or something. But we don't want the element flying close formation through an attack because there's no point in that. Most people aren't going to be able to get shot opportunities if they're flying formation with each other. So lead normally goes in first, and his wingman will offset himself by a couple of seconds, and a couple 100 meters, a kilometer or so behind. Generally, enough time for whoever. So for that, if the lead misses his shot, the opponent has finished his defensive maneuver and might be either leveling out to regain his energy or going in trying to be offensive on whoever missed their shot and takes another shot opportunity. Basically, allow pushes whoever the enemy is to be constantly on the defensive and gives them no time to regain their energy or their SA. Any questions
In that
on?
one, in that one, if the number two is the only one visual with the with the bandit, like does the lead tell him to take point or have a standard call for that if he wants him to take the lead in the attack?
Yeah, usually take lead
No.
is what I will
Yeah.
use. But yeah,
Yeah.
take point, go ahead, I'll follow, anything like that.
Anything? Yeah.
But
Okay.
generally, if we're engaging someone, you make sure the entire formation has it spotted,
Yeah.
and you don't start your dive until everyone, at least in the attacking party, has the opponent spotted. Spotted.
Yeah.
All right. If there's no questions on that, then go ahead and boot up IL2, and we'll just do a quick practice run through of all the formations and the turns at least. We won't practice any of the ACMs today.
Just another quick question on the basic formations. I know it's not a kind of combat related thing, but do you do any have any standard procedures for rejoins? Like, do you join by buzz and breaks or anything like that?
No, we don't. No,
Okay.
we're the if we die, we can just come back. So we're not too worried about collisions or anything, and we don't do anything too close to each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, we don't have any standard procedure for rejoins or exits or anything like that. Just get into your formation quickly and efficiently, and don't hit someone while doing it. And we're
Sorry.
good.
No, rejoining as in coming back, recovering to the airfield to land.
Oh, coming back to the airfield to land. No. Sometimes we feel pretty and confident, so we'll do a formation landing or something, and that's basically just everyone stay in formation throughout the entire landing. But generally, we break off into the given elements of two, and lead takes left or lead takes right, and his wingman will take the opposite. They'll land, taxi off the runway or despawn, and then the next element will come in.
Yeah.
Mic check.
Yeah, we hear you.
Good.
How long were you muted, hers? I just noticed that.
Sorry, no, maybe 30 seconds.
Okay, good. No questions on your part, hers? I think
No.
I've gone through all this with you as well. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and boot up IL2 then.